Thailand. And now we will move to the Thailand perspective to ASEAN perspective on micro-credentials. And may I call upon the chair of these sessions, Dr. Eddy Chong Choy, to share the next parallel session. And may I briefly introduce his biography. Dr. Eddy is currently a Chief Technical Officer at the Financial Accreditation Agency Malaysia and a member of the Chair ASEAN European Expert Advisory Group. And please also welcome our honorable speakers for this session. The first one, Dr. Roger Yap Chao Jr., Head of Education, Youth and Sports Division from ASEAN Secretariat. Second, Dr. Carmen L, Padrón-Nápoles, Chair Expert on Digital Credentials. And the last one is Professor Dr. Paulina Pannen, the Chair from Indonesia Cyber Education Institute. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the speaker and the chair of this session, please.
Thank you very much, Dr. Plaipan, for the introduction. A very good morning to our hosts, organizer, distinguished panelists, my dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us in this session 6 of micro-credentials in ASEAN. As aptly introduced by Sebastian yesterday evening, we have listened to the different perspectives in Thailand. I think we have our colleague here, Klang Jai, who has passionately walked us through on micro-credentials implementation. We have also listened to our colleagues in the European Union on the perspectives there. So it is equally interesting to look at what is it for us in this region. And to begin with, I think I will do injustice if I don't thank Dr. Hasman for a very good synthesis of our discussion yesterday, and of course to Professor Udom as well. I think one of the things that we may agree at this point of time is that there is no single definition of micro-credentials, right? But one thing that struck me was Mikhail's presentation yesterday. I think you mentioned that micro-credentials is a hot stuff. So if we don't remember the definition of micro-credential, all we need to remember is these two words, hot stuff. All right, let me just go briefly into the perspective of our discussion in this session, and then lead this to the presentation that our panelists will share with us. So to begin with, I believe that we all remember about the policy, the micro-credentials policy in European Union that was shared with us yesterday. It was a very interesting discussion. So perhaps it is also interesting to look at whether can we have a similar guideline driving implementation or providing guidance to us in the ASEAN region. So to answer this, of course, we have our very good colleague here, Roger, from the ASEAN Secretariat. And interestingly, if you read his profile, he has a European Masters in Lifelong Learning, Policy and Management. So it is apt that we have Roger with us to share his perspectives, both in his current role in the ASEAN Secretariat, as well as how lifelong learning can be applied in this context. And yesterday, we have also listened to some research works in the European region on micro-credentials. So do we have a research of this nature in ASEAN? We do, right? So because of that, we have Carmen with us, who will share with us some of the findings of her research work that she has conducted for SHARE. Right? So Carmen is basically a SHARE expert, a share expert on digital credentials. And she has been doing a lot of research on digital credentials and micro-credentials. So it is definitely good to have her to share her perspective with us. And we have Paulina. Paulina is the chair of the Indonesia Cyber Education Institute, or in short, ICE. So it is a consortium where the consortium under the leadership of Paulina has been working on unbundling courses. And one interesting thing that I pick up from Paulina is the fact that there is already works going on to micro-credentialize games development. Right, so that will be something interesting that we definitely would like to hear from Paulina more on this. So we have only about 45 minutes or 40 minutes or so. So may I suggest that each one of us take about 10 minutes each. If there's any question from the floor, or if there's any question coming from our online participants, we'll be more than happy to take them later. All right, so without much ado, may I pass the floor now to Roger. Yeah, Roger, please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me? Good morning, fellow delegates, participants, both in person and virtually. It's my honor to speak in front of you, talking about micro-credentials in the ASEAN region. I'd like to thank the EU delegation, the SHARE program, KMUTT, King Mongkut University of Technology Thonburi for organizing this very insightful event. But since time is short, let me put forth key areas for consideration, particularly at the ASEAN region. I'm supposed to talk about higher education, about micro-credentials, particularly in higher education in the ASEAN region. The first thing that comes to my mind is, what am I going to say at the ASEAN region? Is there something going on at regional level? The discussions yesterday, both from a European and Thai perspective, shows that there was a need, and there is a need, for common definition, for common criteria, but initiatives at the ASEAN region has not been undertaken yet, aside from the research, which will be presented by the next speaker. So I was about to stand here and tell you, I have nothing to say. However, I have something to highlight and advocate, that there is a need to put up guidelines, to have a common definition, so that we advocate regional cooperation, quality assurance, and recognition at the ASEAN region, particularly for micro-credentials. Take note, as discussed yesterday and through informal discussions, micro-credentials is not new. It has been there. We're just changing the name and operationalizing it within context, not only in higher education, but also in the TVET sector. Take note, TVET is both training institutions and higher education. So the use of micro-credentials as tools for enhancing inclusiveness, enhancing personalized learning is very important. And the need for regional cooperation, particularly for quality assurance and recognition, cannot be underestimated. In fact, we should emphasize it. Let me put you back and remind you of the ASEAN context. The ASEAN is not only 10 countries, but it is moving towards an ASEAN community, which was established officially in 2015. As of today, we are working towards a post-2025 ASEAN community vision. It's ongoing, but at the end of the day, we are working towards a rules-based, people-oriented, and people-centered community, anchored and contributing and complementing to the global community. This includes the Sustainable Development Goals, including poverty eradication, inclusive quality education and lifelong learning for all, increasing partnerships, and a lot of other global challenges. So as such, micro-credentials has the potential to contribute. Second thing, there is other developments at the ASEAN region is the ongoing development of an ASEAN higher education space, or even Southeast Asian higher education space, which we will be launching next week. We will be launching the roadmap towards an ASEAN higher education space on the 27th of July, 1 year, exactly 1 year from the establishment of the ASEAN Working Group on Higher Education Mobility, which was supported by the SHARE program. For that, we are immensely grateful. Outside of that, the ASEAN TVET Council had a regional policy dialogue a few weeks ago, also in Hanoi. The discussions were about governance and regional cooperation on TVET, both from the training perspective and from the higher perspective. Discussions on the use of micro-credentials and digital transformation were also on the table. But there's no official discussion yet, no official policy dialogue undertaken at regional level. However, we informally agreed to start the discussion. As such, the discussion at the ASEAN level will not only be focused on TVET, but it will also be focused on higher education. And as such, I'm looking forward to all your support. Furthermore, when we're talking about ongoing developments at the ASEAN level, one of the ongoing declarations that is being developed is the declaration towards digital transformation of education systems in ASEAN, which covers early childhood care and development all the way to higher education and even continuing professional education. We also have the declaration on human resource development for a changing world of work. Basically, the discussions yesterday and earlier today talks about skills, the need for reskilling, upskilling, the need for increasing employability, but also the need for personal development, human development, and contribution to society, both nationally, regionally, and globally. As such, micro-credentials is a tool for us to utilize to enhance inclusiveness, equity, and reach of education, and enhance personalized learning, be it credit-bearing, non-credit-bearing, will it be stackable, leading towards full academic qualifications or not. At the end of the day, learning occurs, and this learning can be translated to contributions to society and to the ASEAN region. I won't take up too much of your time, but I just want to highlight, we need the discussion at regional level to develop the platform, guidelines, common definitions, and mechanisms to operationalize micro-credentials. The tool is there. Most of the work has been done at national level and institutional level, as seen yesterday in the European presentations, the Thailand presentations, and today under presentations from Singapore, Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines. You will recognize the diverse approach done by national levels in the ASEAN region, but you also have to highlight and understand the importance of micro-credentials has been recognized. However, these are done at national level. We need regional mechanisms to operationalize it and make it regional so that the developments and impact of micro-credentials go beyond national context, contributes to the regional context so that we can work together across regions and hopefully make it operationalized across the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Roger. You are definitely on time. Thank you so much for sharing some very important perspectives with us. And I think there are some points which struck my attention. The first one is AEC. I think we are reminded of the ASEAN Economic Community that is to be realized by 2025. right? And therefore, and if we still remember some of the characteristics of the AEC, which include the free movement of labor, capital, trade, and therefore we will be increasingly expecting to see some competencies that are required, not just within the national borders, but also across borders. Right? The question now is, how can we ensure that? And micro-credentials is definitely a way to go. And I think the other point that you have aptly mentioned here is the fact that there are a number of developments going on in ASEAN countries as far as micro-credentials are concerned. Of course, we'll get to listen to our colleagues from Singapore, from Indonesia, from Malaysia, and Thailand as well. Yeah, Philippines, sorry, and Philippines as well. So the question now is, how can we come together, right, to agree on a common set of guidelines and also definition of micro-credentials so that all of us will have a seamless implementation, understanding and implementation of micro-credentials. So let us bear that important point in mind. And again, ladies and gentlemen, keep your questions to the end of the session. Right? I will be more than happy to take them. In fact, there are already some questions coming in from our online participants. So please bear with us. Okay, let us now move on to the second speaker, Carmen. Yes, please. So Carmen will share with us some interesting research outcomes from her work. So Carmen, please.
Hello, can you hear me? Okay, good. So I'm trying to run the presentation. It is ready to go. It seems that we have some issues with the presentation. The presentation? Do you have my presentation?
Don't have presentation.
Sorry?
Yep, don't have presentation.
Do not have presentation. I sent my presentation, so it's supposed to be there. Okay, do you have Paulina's presentation? And so we don't stop. Okay, thank you. Thank you.
So while the technical team is sorting out on the presentation slide, so may we invite Paulina?
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning to all of you, to my Muslim friends. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Allow me to present to you about micro-credentials in Indonesia. Micro-credential in Indonesia actually started formally under what we called MBKM policy, the Merdeka Belajar Kampus Merdeka program, freely translated as Freedom Learning, Freedom Campus. It was launched early in 2020, even before COVID outbreak. So why the MBKM policy? It is because the government realized that the needs for quality graduates in industry is very high. However, there is skill gap between university graduates and also the need, if compared to the needs from job market and industry. So the government is thinking how we can do it, and they launch MBKM program, Freedom Learning, Freedom Campus, supported by the digital transformation in higher education. So within the MBKM program, students are allowed to take 20 credits from other study programs in one university, and then in addition to that, they can take 40 credits from any other universities, even foreign universities abroad, virtually, and also can also be what you call physical presence. And then, in general, the definition provided by the government is that micro-credential program is a complementary part to regular on-campus learning and serve to fill the gaps in the skills provided in college with those required in the world of work and industry. So it is short term. It's only one semester of 20 credits hour only, but it is certified, and it can be consist of several courses and or plus activities for some credit hours, which is actually 20 or less than that. And it is based on one competency taken from the competency standard of any profession. And it has value added for students, and it is related and in collaboration with industry. And the government also added reskilling and upskilling for the public if you go beyond the higher education context. Okay. So the micro-credential was started in 2021 with Credential Mikro Mahasiswa Indonesia, and some for the teachers and some for data scientists. However, the government clumped it together into what we called MSIB program, Magang Studi Independen Bersertifikat, or in English, I translate it as Certified Internship and Independent Study. In this MSIB program, the one proposing the micro-credential program should be the industry. So it should be the box in the middle, Microsoft, Traveloka, Bank Indonesia, AWS, etc., in collaboration with the universities or any educational institutions for any program on the right-hand side box, cloud technology, digital marketing, social media, etc. So this year, for example, the government received about 4,000 proposals and selected 1,500 something out of the 4,000. So there are many programs going on with the industry and also with the university. And provided the funding from the government, so the government can top up the funding actually, so the industry will provide something and also the government will provide something. Everything should be what you call assured its quality by what we call BNSP. BNSP is the National Office for Professional Standard under the Ministry of Manpower. So it takes two ministries already. Okay, the one with the universities is Ministry of Education, and the certification must go through the inspection and the approval of BNSP under the Ministry of Manpower. ICE Institute coming under the MSIB because ICE Institute is offering unbundled courses which can actually be rebundled into micro-credentialing based on whatever industry needs. And we have partners, right now we have 38 partners with international agencies, local agencies, also with some of the industry. We offer virtual exchange students, we offer also digital credentialing, and we offer also flexi learning. The one which we formally called micro-credential is the program for game developer. It has about 20 credits, started with the selection, administrative, and also placement tests there. And then based on the placement test, we put the students into 5 streams of game development. And then after that, they have 15 credits courses to do it virtually, online courses. And then after that, they go into the capstone project where they are grouped together into 10 students per group to take what you call to make the game. And then we had 672 right now, and it is being endorsed by the Association of Game in Indonesia. That is the industry that is proposing our program to the MSIB program. In addition to the higher education context, the government also pay attention to the unemployment rate in Indonesia, which is very high. Right now, we have 11.53 million people in Indonesia unemployed. So there are various ministries coming into play with their own micro-credential program, although they didn't say it is micro-credential. For example, Ministry of Communication and Information, they offer what we call Digital Talent Scholarship, a series of programs that can be taken by anybody, public, after you graduate from university. And its certification is endorsed by the BNSP. And then the other one is Kartu Prakerja, or pre-work card. That is for the graduates who don't have any work or job yet, or the people who are fired or not having job. Layout. Okay, layout by the company due to COVID, due to anything else, and then they have the certification also endorsed by BNSP. The course provider are any course provider at all available. And then the service provider also, the funding, etc., is coming not from the government per se, but from anybody. Okay, so this is the true, PPP in practice, actually. So we prepare them to be able to get a job, upskilling and reskilling. And then we have 3 issues in Indonesia right now regarding micro-credentials. Yes, it is an opportunity for all of us in higher education as well as government and industry. But yes, we need the definition, a common ground for everybody to say that, yes, this is a micro-credential program. And also, what's in it for the players, the A, the academician, and the B, the business partners, and the G, the government. It needs to be laid out properly. And then the other thing is about specification. Regarding the specification, especially we deal with the learning outcome. What is actually the learning outcome or the competencies required by the industry versus a learning outcome or competency which is already in the strategic plan for the government and also for the university. The triangle must be matching to each other. The other thing is about the credentials. Who is issuing credentials? Is it trusted? What is the quality assurance? Is it going to be the BNSP all along or any other accreditation agencies, quality assurance agencies? And then the other things is how we can verify if I get the certification my certification is okay, is of quality, is of the learning outcome, etc. So those are three issues that we foresee in Indonesia that needs to be discussed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paulina, for a very interesting presentation. Again, I'm always fascinated by the micro-credentials on games development. Now, maybe later on we'll ask you who are the participants of this program, right? Are we seeing people like my age enrolling in those micro-credentials, or those very young generation who is so obsessed with games? We will look at that later. And of course, the pre-work card is a very interesting concept as well, something that we believe can be a major takeaway from the Indonesian context. So I hope the technical team is ready. All right, so Carmen, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for having me. Can you hear me? I have problems to hear me. Okay, now I hear myself. Thank you for having me. I'm going to make a presentation about the micro-credentials in Asia, and specifically a short overview on the current status of the SHARE ACTS. I'm working for Knowledge Innovation Center. I'm acting as an expert in micro-credentials for the SHARE program. So my presentation will be based on the study we had conducted last year related to the mapping and identification of digital credit transfer systems and the needs in the Asian region. And based on that study, the results of that study, we come up with a set of recommendations for digital credential recognition in Asia and the digital transfer system within the SHARE framework. Before we dip into the work we had done, it will be interesting to talk about the credentials. We have been talking about micro-credentials all along yesterday and today, and the presenters before me were commenting about the need of having a shared understanding of what are micro-credentials. Before we go into micro-credentials, it will be interesting to know that credentials per se are a document, a certificate about the claims about that an organization issued to a specific organization or individual. In the case of educational credentials, we are talking about the achievements that are resulted after a learning experience. We have different type of credentials, those related to formal qualifications, like a normal program studies, the degrees, the professional certification, but also we have the mobility documents that we are going to focus. Part of the work we have conducted is focused on mobility. We also have the non-formal certificates, that those are the ones that are awarded once a non-formal course had been completed and the learner had achieved the specific learning outcomes. The recognition of skills is another type of educational credentials, and the record of experience. As you see, there is a whole bunch of different type of credentials. When we talk about micro-credentials, yesterday we had been commented about the definition provided by the European Commission that had been gaining the increased interest about amongst the educational institution and specifically in the higher education, that they have been considered favorable for the personalization of the learning opportunities and allows the learners to skill or reskill themselves. Micro-credentials, yesterday we were commented that micro-credentials is a small volume of learning certified by a digital credential. But here are two important elements, is the volume of learning certified and by a digital credential. It explicitly defines the learning outcomes in terms of specific knowledge, skills, competences, but also with an indication of the workload associated to those outcomes. They can be generally defined as subunits of credentials, and they also can be stackable. In terms of the workload, yesterday was a discussion about the how big they are. Is it the definition that they could be between 1 and 30 ECTS, that we are talking about 25 or 30 hours are equivalent to 1 ECTS, and they should be also quality assurance verified. Here it's important to highlight that all what we have been talking yesterday and today about micro-credentials, the focus had been put on the learning opportunities that led to the achievement of micro-credentials. And it had been kind of mixed between micro-credentials and the learning opportunities. The courses that had been shown yesterday and had been shown today, those are learning opportunities that led to the achievement of micro-credentials. And I think that it will be interesting to get a common understanding on this. What are micro-credentials? It's the result, it's what is awarded to the learners once they had completed their learning experience. And the learning experience is based on the set of activities that have been described or conducted by a learning opportunity. So this is important to have the differentiation between the learning opportunity that leads to the micro-credentials. Our work had been focused on credentials for student mobility, that on the credit transfer between institutions within the context of one single program, but also could be in the mobility between institutions after the completion of the program, or between the academy and the labor market after graduation. The credentials in the mobility process, there is a kind of life cycles that start with the transcript of records that basically describe which are the outcomes, that the achievements of the student after completing all the learning activities, and they are used to transfer between institutions. Another important element is the issuance, the issuance of digital records based on those transcripts of records. And an important element to consider is that they should be signed and secured in a way that can be tampered evidence. So if anything had been changed in that credential, it will be easily visible that this is not the original or the valid credential. Then is the retrieval. The retrieval has to do with the possibility that the learners had for using or getting their credentials and being able to share those credentials with whomever they would want to do, independently of the institution that had issued the credential. What this means that normally when you get the title, if you need to present your title to another institution, you will need to give a copy, authenticated copy of that title. Using digital credentials, it's a simple way of sharing a link to your digital credential, so you don't need to rely on the original institution. And the last part is the recognition support, that having those credentials will allow the recognition of the acquired knowledge, skills, or competences from one university to the other one. The credential recognitions requires four main stakeholders. We have the issuer institute organization, the verifying part, the owner of the credential, and a registry. Here in the diagram is shown in a very general way that we had the registry it could be a digital registry, but also already exists the normal registry for papers. The idea of all the work we had been conducted so far is to ensure that those will be digital registries, and recognition starts once the credential is issued, that the owner will be able to present it to a verifying party, and that verifying party will be able to check that the credential is authentic and the issuer is already recognized as the real issuer of the credential. Then part of the work that we had conducted was that get an overview of the digital credentialing on a global overview. Based on two important elements. One are the set of standards of specification that allows the definition of the credentials and the exchange of the credentials. And the other part are the systems that allows those exchange. We have the Digital Credential Consortium is a consortium of universities in North America and Europe. And the Europass EDCI is the infrastructure that allows the issuing and verifying the credentials in Europe. And the Erasmus Without Paper is the system that allows the mobility management in Europe, and it has associated more than 3,000 universities in Europe. We also want to analyze the initiatives in Asia. As had been seen today and yesterday, there are many different initiatives, but what is common is the lack of having a common understanding and a common definitions and common standards in the region. So the recommendations we gave after the study was, first of all, pursue an alignment on global standards for mobility and credentialing. There will be three possible ways. One is to create the Asian standards. The other one is aligned with the American standard or aligned with the European standards. Since this is a shared program and is based on the European funds, the idea is that to keep aligned with the EU standards. The second one is the implementation of the technology roadmap for the credential recognitions that will consider the whole cycle. And this will include the credit transfer between institutions for the regulation of the mobilities. We are working already on this point. The award of credentials to students in a form of digital signed certificates, that this is for the future. The transfer of program credentials between institutions as part of the course enrollment, and the transfer of credentials to the third parties for the purposes of employment, immigration, etc. Then we also recommend the use of interinstitutional agreements to regulate the recognition in short terms, because this will set a framework that once a mobility had been implemented, it won't be needed to negotiate again the terms. So this will be useful to have. Also to establish the Credential Recognition Center of Excellence that will guide and will select a set of guidelines and policies that will allow us to keep the work done on the mobility in the region. And the last is to consider open and self-certain data management paradigms. That this is what I had commented before, that the owners of the credentials will be able to share those credentials. And first, I'm just going to provide you an overview of the work we are doing right now. We are creating a new digital credit transfer system that we had already presented the different tools that they are already working in Europe, but we get feedback and determine the requirements for the region. This is already done. And we set up the configuration of the tools based in two pillars: the interoperability, that we will have a common data network, or also a centralized system for the exchange, and a common data format and templates for the learning agreements, but also for the transcript of records. And the other pillar is on the authentication that will allow us that students and higher education personnel will be able to connect to the system using their own credentials for their institutions. And we are working on the identity provision. Basically, the system will allow us to do the learning agreement management and the transcript of record management with a differentiated interfaces. Here we have a short overview of the current status that if you had the chance of seeing any of my presentations in the previous 2 months, this is a new version of the interface that allows that the ongoing mobility and the incoming mobilities that they showing their status and the information for the different learners that are participants on the mobility, and the creation of the learning agreement. So this is all my presentation, and thank you very much for having me. And if you have any questions, I would be glad to answer them.
Thank you very much, Carmen. Again, you have presented some very interesting insights that I believe we can all take home with, one of which is digital credentialing. I'm sure you definitely need a longer session on your own, right, to share your insights with us on how it works, on what will be the future of digital credentialing. Now, I was just reminded some weeks ago by a friend, as we talk about credit banks, that's where we should also start exploring on personal wallets. And it is not the wallets that we are keeping in our pockets, but rather a wallet of the credentials that we have achieved, and probably a step beyond that, which is to match the credentials that we have gained with probably job prospects, right, in the future. And it is also unfortunate to see that if we look at the banking and the tourism sectors, we see that to some extent there is a connected system all over. But is there one for higher education? Yeah, so that is something that Carmen is working on, which is a good news to all of us. And of course, linked to that will be the issue that Carmen is also addressing on the recognition of credentials across borders, and looking at the credit transfer system that is available right now, which is definitely a good news, something that would boost the motivation, something that would sort of allow micro-credentials to flourish, right, in years to come. All right, we have received some questions from the online chat, but before we ask our panelists on the questions from our online participants, may I ask if any of our colleagues here have any question for our panelists? Yes, we have one. Please feel free to ask our panelists any question, except can we go for coffee break now? Yeah, Darren, please.
Many thanks, Eddy and the panel. I'm really pleased to see the variety of and broad basis of issues that are taking place across the region. Of course, we've engaged in the SHARE program, we've engaged Dr. Paulina, we work day to day with Roger, and we're really delighted to have the expertise of Carmen, Killian, Anthony Camilleri, the Knowledge Innovation Centre and the European University Foundation helping the SHARE program develop this platform. To your point, Eddy, on Carmen's session all on her own, we will have that opportunity next week at the SHARE Policy Dialogue. Carmen is going to lead a workshop on this precise issue and I suppose the future of digital credentials for student mobility within Southeast Asia. Carmen, I think you made a point. Interestingly, yes, the SHARE program is an EU-funded program, but I wouldn't think that is the only reason you've recommended the EU model for this. There are a number of other perhaps salient points on this. So I wonder, could you just outline those for us and why the EU model on digital credentials would be most consistent for Southeast Asia as a region? Thanks.
One of the reasons that we are, besides that the SHARE is the European-funded program, basically is based that the European learning model allows not only to define the learning opportunity, to describe the learning opportunities, but also to describe the quality assurance for those learning opportunities and the definition of the credentials. The model allows us to define the credentials, but the infrastructure that is based on the European learning model, the ACDI, allows us to issue, sign, and award the credentials. So for the time being, is the only infrastructure that has completed the digital signed credentials cycle. So that's the main idea behind that we will propose that to use the European standards instead of the American standards. The other reason is that the American standards are basically related to the budgets, and budgets are kind of complementary type of credentials. They are partially signed as well, but they include all the information about the achievements, but not about the issuer. So it's not a way to see on a badge, when the badge is verified, who is the issuer. You only get which is the name of the institution, but you don't get any extra information on that institution. In contrast, the ECDI allows you to know who is the institution, how it had been verified, and this is one of the main reasons. The other one is that the EDCI allows the definition on issuing credentials, all type of credentials, not only for micro-credential, but the full transcript of records of the university degree, and the transcript of records as well. So we are talking about a more complete infrastructure. So those are the reasons why we are proposing. And in addition, we are working on that infrastructure. So those are the main reasons.
Thank you, Carmen. Is there any question from the floor? We can have probably one more. Yes, Dr. Hazman, please.
Thank you, Eddy. My question is that as we are looking at the more technical definition of credentials, micro-credentials, is there a lesson for higher education in terms of the macro-credentials that they traditionally offer? It is a parchment and a transcript. Actually, from an employer's perspective, it's fairly, pardon the crude use of the term, it's a useless document. It doesn't tell you what are the competencies, and it actually masks a lot of details, right, which are not known to the user. But micro-credential is traveling in a different way. It's becoming much more transparent, explicit, focused. The competency, the assessments can even be embedded for a user to see what exactly was done, achieved. And is there a lesson for higher education institutions in terms of innovating the way in which they give their credentials, the information that the credentials carry for users?
I think that one of the takeaways was on what we had commented today for the higher education institutions is like for years, when the transcript of records or the title had been issued, it's just an overview of which are the subjects that the learner had a course, had been enrolled and passed, and they are marked. And there is not a full description in a sense of the capabilities of the learner or that graduate. Using this new type of credentiality allows that not only the university to provide the full description of what the graduate is capable of doing, but also allows that the industry to get to know exactly which are those skills, the competences, the attitudes that have been developed, and to some extent matches, to some extent those matches to the needs of the specific company. So basically the main take on is like we need to put more the focus on showing which are the skills that had been developed, not only the knowledge that had been acquired, but the skills and the attitudes that had been developed through the whole program. So that will be the take on for the universities.
Can I add something? Beyond micro-credentials, the issue of showing the methodology and transparency in traditional higher education qualifications and programs is still a major problem to date. Transparency instruments such as the diploma supplement is not very much in use in the Southeast Asian region. Even those that use it does not adequately illustrate the methodologies, the assessment and quality assurance procedures. So there's still a major problem. So even in traditional higher education, it's something. Another aspect, and probably related to transparency, is the credit transfer mechanism across the region, with some countries not really having a working credit transfer system. How much more mobility and credit transfers across the region. So there are still issues. We don't expect the development of micro-credentials to be ahead of the traditional system. So I just wanted to highlight those things.
Thank you, Roger. And thank you, Darren, too, for mentioning about the workshop that Carmen is going to do for us next week. I'm sure many of us look forward to the workshop. And of course, I think another significant takeaway from what Carmen has presented to us is that all those points can actually go into that regional discussion, right? For us to agree on a common understanding, a common framework for micro-credentials implementation. All right, I'll just quickly go through some of the comments. They are actually comments, many of them are very good constructive comments from our online participants. There are only one or two questions coming from the participants. So perhaps we will see after I've read out the comments or feedback, if there's anything to add on our side. Otherwise, we will take them on as part of the research work that Carmen is doing. So along the presentation, I think one of the points mentioned here was the fact that credit transfer systems work best if micro-credentials are standardized across the region. So again, that gives us the reason to work more closely together. If we wait until everything has been discussed, we will never get started. So I think that's a very good point. Thank you very much to our participant for highlighting this point. Okay, there is also another point on Europass. There is this comment on, since we are encouraging EU students to come to the region, and the fact that we are also sending our students to Europe, it would be very useful to look at other regional standards like Europass. So perhaps this could fit into the research that you are currently doing, and perhaps maybe steer more discussions or conversations in the future to look at how this could happen. And linked to that will be the European model that you mentioned, right? Since there is this part of the research that focuses on the European model, this is where one of the concerns that came from our online colleague is that at present only the EU organizations can obtain the seal, the EU seal, that are needed to sign, and hope that this problem can be quickly fixed to encourage the experiment that we are doing. Yeah, so those are very constructive comments indeed. There are also questions in terms of the micro-credentials. Can they be used to compensate for subjects which are offered as traditional credits? So again, I think there are multiple models that we are seeing today, one of which is the standalone micro-credentials, whereby they are not part of any academic programs. We are also seeing another model whereby the academic courses are actually converted into micro-credentials, and therefore students now have the option to either follow the conventional course or to take up that micro-credentials, and yet they still earn credits from those courses. Right, so there are multiple models available. If there's anything you would like to add, yeah, Paulina, please.
Thank you. I think there is one key to the programs, micro-credential programs in Indonesia, especially in ICE Institute, is the collaboration among higher education institutions. Like, for example, the game developer program. It is being developed by 10 universities, so not a single university own the whole program. So 10 universities, and then acknowledged or endorsed by the Association of Game in Indonesia, so that is the industry. And it is being offered to everybody within higher education right now, although we receive application from the public, but right now it is for higher education. And so far we have got 182 students coming from 182 universities in Indonesia. So everybody is just, everywhere. So that is a kind of collaboration that will really ease out all the credit transfer problem. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to add something though. Two focus. One is when Paulina was presenting on the pre-work card. The pre-work card is an initiative from Indonesia's president, President Widodo. The core aspect and the innovativeness of the pre-work card is the mix of conditional cash transfer, skills development, public-private partnership, because all the providers are not just from public institutions or higher education, it's everywhere, but they have to be authorized and recognized. Then there's a component giving them a certain amount of money to take the course, and there's an initiative component upon completing a number of courses and credits to give them a certain amount of money to incentivize them to study and learn skills so they get back to work. That's an innovative aspect, which shows the power of micro-credentials, MOOCs, and digital transformation. Second aspect we were talking about, one of the comments was about learning and Europass. The discussion on credit banks, we were discussing with Chang yesterday on the learning, the credit banks, but it's not only in discussion. Singapore, Skills Future Singapore, if I remember right, started with qualifications passport, and they are moving towards a learning passport. Certain initiatives are also being undertaken by other ASEAN member countries. Similarly, the discussion on linkages between the Europass and other ASEAN member countries, particularly for student mobility, is something that needs to be discussed because it's highly political and there's a lot of discussions and dialogues to be done before any agreement can be put forward. But that's a very interesting question and suggestion for future dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Yeah, just for your information, Changda is the COO of the HAID Foundation in Singapore. He'll be speaking next week. Right. Time is running out, so I think we will have to wrap up the session. So on behalf of the host, the organizer, and the participants, please give a round of applause to our panelists for a very interesting discussion. Thank you very much. And on behalf of the panelists, we also thank all of you, ladies and gentlemen, for being with us in this session. All the very best to all of us as we move forward to the uncharted water. Right? Take good care, stay safe, and see you in the next session. So at the meantime, enjoy the coffee break. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Eddy and all the panelists. And now